Cartel bosses are some of the most dangerous people on earth, and the last thing you want to do is to step on their toes and face their wrath. Some people have dared to test their luck with cartel bosses, but they never lived to tell the story. From journalist Javier Valdez Cardenas, who was shot 12 times and killed, to YouTube star Juan Luis Lagunas, who died after sustaining 18 bullet wounds, and then Mexican journalist Rodolfo Rincon Tarachena, whose burnt remains were found in a metal drums, we're going to find out what happened to people who attacked cartel bosses. Juan Luis Lagunas Rosales. The young YouTube star was born in the Mexican state of Sinaloa, a home for cartel bosses. Rosales grew up without the love of his parents. His mother left him with his grandmother as a child, and he never knew his father. Tired of the tough life, Rosales left his hometown at the age of 15. He moved to Culiacan and started doing minor jobs. There he came up with a sensational nickname which is popularly known around the world, El Pirata de Culiacan, or the Pirate of Culiacan. Gradually, he started getting invitations to more parties and soon fell into excessive drinking. He would often post videos of him gulping down a bottle of beer or whiskey on social media. His videos started going viral, and soon the young boy from Sinaloa became a famous YouTube star with millions of followers across all social media. One thing is for sure at this point, and that is the fact that Rosales was living the life he had dreamed of, but all of that didn't last for long. Rosales' videos were centered around excessive drinking and partying. The legal age in Mexico for drinking is 18, but this 17-year-old drank alcohol like his life depended on it. So drunk he would pass out in some of his videos. In one of such videos posted online, Rosales, who was visibly drunk, was seen insulting Nemesio Azucarera Cervantes Mancho. Cervantes is the leader of the Generation Cartel of Jalisco and Mexico's most dangerous drug lords. In the video, a drunk Rosales asked the cartel boss to pee on his cock. The cartel gang asked Rosales to never step foot in Jalisco if he wishes to stay alive, but the YouTuber thought it was mere words and disregarded their warning. On the 18th of December 2017, tragedy struck. Rosales decided to throw a party in Jalisco. While Rosales and his friends were partying, armed individuals walked into the bar and opened fire at Rosales. The YouTuber died, sustaining 15 and 18 bullet wounds. While Rosales might have lost his life as a result of reckless living and excessive drinking, the next victim was a journalist who dedicated his life to exposing drug bosses. Javier Valdez Cardenas. The self-described narco-journalist was an award-winning Mexican journalist. He was one of the founders of Ridois, a weekly newspaper dedicated to exposing crime and corruption in Sinaloa. As someone who dedicated his life to exposing crimes, Valdez wrote several books on drug trafficking, including the popular Miss Narco, which gave an insight into the lives of wives and girlfriends of cartel lords. In one of his books titled Los Moros del Narco, The Kids of the Drug Trade, Children and Teenagers in Mexican Drug Trafficking, Valdez talks about children and teenagers lured into drug trafficking and how these children are exposed to danger at a very young age. In September 2009, Valdez published a series on drug trafficking through his newspaper. This didn't sit well with the drug lords, and they decided it was time they pay the self-described narco-journalist a visit. On that fateful day, a grenade was thrown into Riodoci's office, damaging the buildings, but luckily no lives were lost. At this point, the message was loud and clear, but Valdez paid deaf ears to the warning and threat. Valdez continued exposing the cartel bosses through his writing, and unfortunately for him, his passion for justice sent him on a journey to the afterlife. On Monday, May 15, 2017, Valdez was shot 12 times and killed just a few blocks away from his office. Next on our list is an award-winning journalist who refused to bow to pressure and continued to be a thorn in the flesh of cartel bosses. Anabel Hernandez. Anabel Hernandez is an award-winning Mexican journalist who has dedicated her life to fighting corruption and drug lords. After the release of her book Los Señores del Narco, Anabel became a target of elimination for drug lords. She gave a detailed account of Mexico's drug traffickers and how they operate. The book enraged the cartel bosses, and they started attacking her family. She received several death threats, and even headless animals were sent to her home as a sign of warning. At this point, Anabel knew her life and that of her family were in danger, so she decided to act fast by employing the services of 2 bodyguards, but even that couldn't stop the drug bosses who were determined to eliminate the daring journalist. In December of 2013, something unexpected happened. 11 gunmen were sent to the journalist's house to kill her and her family, but luckily, Anabel wasn't at home. Her bodyguards were taken and beaten, and even her neighbors weren't left out of the attack. It was at this point that it dawned on Anabel that it was time to leave Mexico. The journalist fled the country with her family, but that isn't the end. As she has continued to expose drug bosses, the government, the police, and corruption in Mexico, her social media is dedicated to exposing drug lords to date. Anabel Hernandez might have been lucky to survive all the attacks by the cartel bosses, but the next victim wasn't that lucky. Miroslava breach. For nearly 2 decades, Miroslava Breach was the pin in the ass of cartel bosses. She literally kept them on their toes. She documented cartel crime and political corruption in the national and regional newspapers. She liked to say, "If I die, it will be complete and in one blow." She was so audacious that she usually returned the holiday gift basket that elected officials send to journalists. She usually attached a note saying that politicians should be giving her interviews, not gifts. Breach continued reporting organized crime, drug trafficking, and corruption in Mexico, despite the death threats. The threat became increasingly alarming that she had to review the life insurance provision she made to secure her children's future. She also asked a company in El Paso what it would cost to bulletproof her SUV. At this point, it seems Breach knew the end was near. Breach couldn't afford to bulletproof her SUV, so she decided to quit journalism just to protect herself and her family. Her passion for journalism was stronger than anything else. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't bring herself to stop. The day Breach insisted human rights leaders should do better and stop the rich from stealing public water was the day life was snatched from her. While taking her 14-year-old son to school, an unidentified man approached her SUV and shot her 8 times through the window. Within minutes, the bold, audacious journalist was dead. The next victim wasn't just a journalist, but a crime reporter who dedicated his craft to exposing cartel bosses. Rodolfo Rincon Tarrachina. Rodolfo Rincon Tarrachina, a Mexican journalist and crime reporter for Tabasco Hoy newspaper. Rodolfo writes extensively about drug trafficking and the growing presence of organized crime in his home state. Just like every other journalist who has dared to stand up against drug lords, Rodolfo started receiving death threats after he wrote an article about the Zetas drug cartel. In the article, Rodolfo gave an insight into the gang's drug trafficking activities in Mexico's southern state of Tabasco. He also mentioned the names of some of the drug cartel members. This infuriated the gang, and they decided to teach Rodolfo a lesson he would never forget. A few days after the article was published, Rodolfo went missing on the 20th of January 2007. On Sunday, the 28th of February, the Attorney General office in Tabasco confirmed that Rodolfo was murdered by members of the Los Zetas cartel because of the article he wrote about the gang. The Attorney General's findings are based on the confession of the Los Zetas cartel members who were arrested. The suspect's admission led to a search of the gang's property, where the burnt remains of Rodolfo and 5 other people were found in metal drums. The next victim used big wigs and glasses to deliver her brutal yet chatty criticism to cartel bosses. Leslie Ann Pamela Montenegro. Leslie Ann Pamela Montenegro is a YouTuber popularly known as Nana Pelucas. Nana and her husband ran an online outlet called El Silon Magazine. She was also the host and reporter of El Silon's news shows. Nana Pelucas uses a big wig and glasses to deliver chatty commentary and criticism about drug lords and the government. On several occasions, Nana Pelucas has been targeted by drug lords for revealing information about their activities. On December 4, 2016, a series of narcomantas, banners carrying messages attributed to organized crime, were placed around Acapulco, containing threats aimed at several people, including Montenegro and her husband. On February 5, 2018, 2 unidentified gunmen walked into a restaurant owned by Montenegro and her husband and approached Montenegro, who was sitting with her husband. The gunmen fired at least 2 shots at her face and abdomen before fleeing the scene. According to prosecutors, Leslie Ann Pamela Montenegro was killed because she revealed inside information about Acapulco drug gangs in her YouTube videos. Up next is a social media influencer who thought his wealth was enough power to dare a cartel gang. Rodolfo Fofo Marquez. Social media influencers are often known for their outrageous stunts just for clicks and followers, and this TikToker Rodolfo Fofo Marquez isn't any different. The self-described king of Mexico woke up one morning and decided to show how far his wealth could go. The TikToker used his luxury fleet of cars to create a traffic jam on a bridge in Mexico. In the viral video, which has since been deleted from his TikToker's page, Rodolfo Fofo Marquez was seen bragging about how he was going to shut down the Matute-Remus Bridge in Guadalajara. Fofo Marquez's action was criticized across all social media. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, also responded to the video. The cartel threatened to kidnap Rodolfo Fofo Marquez if they saw him in Guadalajara or anywhere else in retaliation for blocking traffic in their territory. After realizing the effects of his stupidity and out of fear for his life, Fofo Marquez apologized and deleted the video from his page, but unfortunately for him, the CJNG didn't buy any of that. The CJNG, in a social media post called Fofo Marquez, a scum and condemned his stunt on the Guadalajara Bridge. The cartel added that Fofo's stunt is an act they don't tolerate and that they would never allow an asshole come to Jalisco to do these kinds of things. They also added that El Mencho, the leader Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, is the one in charge of Jalisco. The next victim is a passionate journalist who spared no stone unturned when it comes to exposing cartel bosses. Diana Consuelo Turbay Quintero. Diana Turbay was a Colombian journalist and daughter of former. Diana Turbay worked for Neutron News. She also worked for the presidential campaign of Cesar Gaviria and reported on the kidnapping of several wealthy heirs and heiresses by Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel in 1990. She gained a high approval rating for her work during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Her fame prompted the jealousy of rival journalist Valeris Velez, who was drug lord Pablo Escobar's mistress. Despite being born with a silver spoon, Diana Turbay wasn't one of those princesses who just sat pretty at the palace. She was the voice of the people. She didn't miss any opportunity to speak against cartel bosses and corruption in Mexico. However, in a dangerous state like Mexico, nobody is invincible. On the 30th of August 1990, Diana Turbay was tricked and kidnapped. While on her way to do a supposed interview with guerrilla leader Manuel Perez of the ELN, her van was blocked by a Medellin cartel truck. Her driver and bodyguard were killed in the ugly incident. Diana Turbay was thrown into a cell to be guarded by Guerrilla, one of Kingpin Escobar's men. While in prison, Diana Turbay secured the release of one of the hostages held by Escobar in exchange for making a statement that she was treated nicely. She also advised Cesar Gaviria to negotiate her release with Escobar. But unfortunately, before the negotiations could happen, tragedy struck. On the 25th of January 1991, Search Block conducted an unauthorized raid on the prison, and the journalist was killed in the process. As a result of the tragedy, President Gaviria was forced to give in to Escobar's demands. The people of Colombia mourned the death of their beloved journalist who brought people together irrespective of class. Up next is an iconic journalist loved by his country for his activism, Guillermo Cano. Guillermo Cano was an iconic Colombian editor. One of his missions was writing about the ills perpetrated by drug cartels in the national newspaper El Espectador. Cano dedicated his life to exposing drug cartels. He was one of Colombia's most loved journalists of all time. He wrote extensively about the destructive and deadly impact of drug cartels in Colombia. He also boldly and openly criticized drug lords. However, in a country like Colombia where journalists are targeted and attacked for just doing their jobs, it wasn't long until the iconic journalist was silenced. On December 17, 1986, while leaving the newspaper office, Guillermo Cano was murdered by hitmen linked to Pablo Escobar's powerful Medellin cartel. The day after his death, thousands of people lined the streets for his wake at the El Espectador office, and all Colombian media, from newspapers, radio, and movie theaters, ceased all operations for an entire day in solidarity. The next victim is an activist whose passion drove him to an early grave. Jaime Vasquez. Jaime Vasquez was a Colombian journalist and social activist. He was known for denouncing repeated acts of corruption involving irregularities in public contracts. Vasquez dedicated his time to investigating and highlighting public debate issues that many people preferred not to talk about. Through his Facebook page, the activist made broadcasts exposing the illegalities of drug lords and abuses of power by local authorities. He was always receiving threats because of his work, but even that couldn't stop the audacious journalist who vowed to stop at nothing until he exposed all illegal activities in Colombia. However, the journalist's passion for activism drove him to an early grave. He was shot in Cucuta in front of about a dozen witnesses. According to prosecutors, the suspect immediately fled the scene on a motorbike. Not even bodyguards could save the next victim from the hands of cartel bosses. Alejandro Martinez. Alejandro Martinez was a Mexican journalist who covered one of the country's most dangerous crime beats. Martinez, who called himself El Hijo del Llanero Solitito, the son of the Lone Ranger, owned a popular Facebook page dedicated to covering crime in Celaya, an area known for turf wars between drug cartels. Martinez was assigned police guards by the government after several attempts on his life, but unfortunately, even the bodyguards couldn't protect the journalist from the drug bosses who were after his life. One fateful day, while traveling in the company of his two police guards, gunmen drove up to the police car that Martinez was traveling in and shot him dead. The next victim dedicated his column specifically to exposing the activities of drug traffickers. Francisco Arratia Saldierna. Francisco Arrechea was a Mexican journalist and an active columnist for an online journal and 4 regional newspapers. In his column, Arrechea frequently wrote about political corruption, organized crime, and education. He used his column to attack cartel bosses and the impact of drug trafficking in Mexico. His work infuriated the cartel bosses and they threatened him at any given opportunity. One fateful day, men affiliated with the Gulf Cartel paid Arrechea a visit. He argued with the gang who arrived at his business in a red vehicle, and about an hour later on his way home, the journalist was kidnapped by the gang. A few hours later, his body was dumped at the office of the Red Cross. The journalist had been tortured before being dumped from a moving vehicle. His fingers were broken, his skull fractured, his palms burned, and his chest injured. He was taken to a nearby hospital and died moments later of a heart attack. On September 24th, Tamaulipas police arrested Raul Castellan Cruz in Matamoros, one of the gang members. Raul Castellan Cruz confessed to participating in the killing of the journalist. He also confessed that the murder was motivated by Arrechea's journalistic work. Up next is a journalist who puts his life on the line for his job. Nelson Matus Pena. Nelson Matus Pena was a Mexican journalist who dedicated his life to exposing and covering crime in Mexico. He didn't just dedicate his time, but also made sure he did his work with integrity. He was also the founder and editor of Lo Real de Guerrero. If you're wondering what that is, Lo Real de Guerrero is a news website and Facebook page that covered crime, violence, and security issues in Acapulco. The fact that Matus was passionate and dedicated to his work made him a target for drug bosses. He attracted the attention of some dangerous drug bosses that eventually led to his sudden death. No one expected it. Not even Matus would have thought his passion would cause his own death. In 2017, he escaped a potential assassination attempt by unidentified assailants. The events surrounding his death were mysterious because a few days before his death, Lo Real de Guerrero published several stories without a byline covering violent incidents and deadly shootouts in Acapulco. Many suspect that those stories were what led him to his death because on the 15th of July 2023, Matus was brutally shot dead in the port of Acapulco. The next victim, out of fear for her life, decided to attack the Los Zetas drug cartel discreetly. Marisol Macias. Marisol Macias Castañeda, also known as Maria Elizabeth Macias Castro in media reports and known for her online name Nena de Laredo or La Nena de Laredo, was a Mexican journalist. She was also editor-in-chief for Primera Hora in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, Mexico. She posted information about drug trafficking online. She secretly used her company website to post about drug cartels in her city. She would write under the pseudonym La Nena de Laredo or the Girl from Laredo. Marisol targeted the criminal groups around her area, the Los Zetas drug cartel. She dedicated her time and resources to exposing their activities. The Los Zetas drug cartel was not pleased with this, so they retaliated. Marisol was killed with her head on top of a popular stone monument, the Christopher Columbus Monument, in a busy section of the city. The rest of her body, and belongings as well as the handwritten note, were seen close to the monument. The Zetas gang left a note next to her body which reads, "Ok Nuevo Laredo en Vivo," and a social media site translating, "I am Nena de Laredo, and I'm here because of my online reports and yours. For those who don't believe this happened to me because of my actions, for trusting in the Army and Marines, thank you for your attention. La Nena de Laredo." It is still a mystery how the gang discovered her identity on social websites. Up next is a Mexican journalist who was considered an enemy of the state by both the government and cartel lords. Regina Martinez. Regina Martinez was a Mexican journalist. She was often considered as an enemy of the state. She made powerful enemies as a result of her hard-hitting journalism. She investigated allegations of collusion between political leaders, security forces, and narco-traffickers in Mexico. She was undoubtedly a source of irritation for 4 consecutive state governors and most cartel bosses. Her work highlighted violence, abuses of power, and cover-ups in the pages of Mexico's foremost investigative news magazine, Proceso. Despite the numerous death threats, Martinez refused to give in and continued with her hard-hitting journalism. But just like every other journalist who has dared to be bold and different, Martinez's life was snatched from her on the 28th of April 2012 in her bungalow in the state capital, Xalapa. She fought back but was later overpowered by the gang who beat her badly and broke her jaw before asphyxiating her with a dish towel. The next victim was kidnapped and killed. His body was wrapped in plastic and dumped on the road. Luis Enrique Ramirez Ramos. Luis Enrique Ramirez Ramos was a Mexican journalist. He was also the founding director of the Fuentes Fidedignas, or Reliable Sources website. His website covers drug cartel violence that plagues Sinaloa and political disputes. Ramirez Ramos, who also columns for the El Debate newspaper, had written about the expanding scope of violence against journalists by drug cartels. According to friends and family, Ramirez Ramos had received several threats concerning his work. On the morning of May 5th, Ramirez Ramos was abducted near his apartment a few hours later. His body was found on a dirt road wrapped in plastic near a junkyard in the capital of Sinaloa State. According to prosecutors, he died from multiple blows to the head. At first, the motive for his killing was not known, but Sinaloa State happens to be the stronghold of notorious narcotics kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's Sinaloa cartel. Up next is another journalist who was silenced for speaking out against the Felix cartel gang. Lourdes Maldonado. Lourdes Maldonado is another Mexican journalist who lost her life just for speaking against cartel bosses. Lourdes had spoken about the Arellano Felix cartel gang. She exposed their activities to the public and the cartel's obsessive behavior with murdering journalists. Over the years, Lourdes had received threats, including 2 attacks on her car and multiple promises to hunt her down. In 2019, she traveled to Mexico City to confront President Andrés Manuel López Obrador about the risk she felt. "I fear for my life," she told the president live on television at one of his daily morning news briefings. The government listened to Lourdes' pleas and provided her with security, but even that couldn't save her. She was murdered as she arrived at her home. Her worst fears had happened to her. The next victim is a YouTuber who was murdered in the presence of his family. Super Chinelo. Super Chinelo, real name Ruben Ortega, is a popular YouTuber who used his YouTube channel to highlight important parts of Mexican culture. He conducted interviews with people he met with the sole objective of spreading Mexican traditions to new generations. Super Chinelo was also known for his outspoken nature. He had on several occasions criticized corrupt political organizations on his YouTube page. He also spoke against drug trafficking and its effect on Mexico. Super Chinelo might have made some enemies because of his activism. On August 31st, 2022, Super Chinelo and his family returned home, and they were attacked by gunmen. Super Chinelo was shot dead while his wife was injured. The horrific incident happened in the presence of their 4-year-old son. The next victim was murdered by a cartel gang for exposing their activities. El Compa Jorge. Compa Jorge is a popular YouTuber who built his channel around luxury cars. In 2021, Compa Jorge shared a story of how he got kidnapped by cartel members, an experience that has left him traumatized and afraid to leave his house. Compa Jorge continued to expose the cartel members and even revisited the site where he was abducted. He also shared his encounter with how he unknowingly spoke to El Chapo's son. All these revelations made him a target for the cartel gang. On April 18th, 2022, the YouTuber posted a video discussing his plan for the day with his millions of followers, not knowing what awaited him. On his way out of his home, gunmen in a vehicle followed him and shot him multiple times. He died in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. According to eyewitnesses, the gunmen arrived at the scene in a gray Toyota SUV and subsequently intercepted Compa Jorge and fired repeatedly at him. The gunmen fled the scene in an unknown direction. Up next is a businesswoman who was killed by cartel lords hours after denouncing illegal fishing. Minerva Perez. Minerva Perez, a Mexican businesswoman who was the president of the Cámara Nacional de las Industrias Pesquera y Acuícola, Canine Pesca. Perez became a target of attack by cartel bosses when she spoke out against the illegal fishing industry in the past, according to Seda Pesca, a sustainable fishing advocacy group that works in the area. Perez had also complained that drug cartels are extorting protection payments from fishing boats, distributors, truck drivers, and even restaurants. The cartel bosses didn't like the fact that Perez had made their business public, so they decided to silence her permanently. Perez was killed just a few hours after she made a statement to the media denouncing illegal fishing. She was shot outside the facilities of Atenea en el Mar, the seafood company specializing in bivalves in Ensenada, Baja California, of which she was the CEO. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more mind-blowing stories like this, click on any of these links and it will take you straight to another amazing video.